Jennifer Schuett was 8 years old when she was yanked through her bedroom window by a stranger, then strangled, slashed, and left for dead in a field in Dickinson, Texas. She didn't die, and the kidnapper couldn't silence her.
36 years ago, an 8-year-old girl in Dickinson, Texas, was taken from her own bed in the middle of the night, leaving her family with no leads and a search that, in the first hours, turned up nothing. She survived, found the next day in a field, severely injured, after children playing nearby spotted her. Unable to speak from the attack, she gave investigators the only thing she had: a first name the man had used for himself, and a hand-drawn sketch built from memory. A first name and a sketch were not enough. With no fingerprints, no surname, and no match in any system, the case went cold and stayed that way for nearly 2 decades, though it was never closed. Detectives kept the file active, periodically returning to evidence that had been carefully preserved since the night of the attack, waiting for forensic science to catch up to what they couldn't yet prove. Then, 18 years later, a single DNA test did something no detective, no sketch, and no decade of searching had been able to do. What that test found, and how close it came to never being run at all, is where this story begins. Before we dive deeper into this story, let us know where you're watching from. And if you like videos like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Dickinson, Texas sat in that corridor, a small city 30 miles southeast of Houston, where much of the working population clocked in at the petrochemical plants along the channel. Summer there meant humidity thick enough to fog a window screen by noon. Families in the apartment complexes along the access roads ran window units instead of central air, and windows stayed cracked open through the night for what relief the Gulf breeze offered. Children spent the long stretch of summer break outside until the streetlights came on. Jennifer Schuett was 8 years old, living with her mother in a ground-floor apartment in Dickinson. That summer, she filled her days the way most 8-year-olds in that town did, with nothing on the calendar more urgent than the next one, and no reason to expect that her own bedroom wasn't the safest place she could be. That ordinary rhythm held for exactly as long as it could. On the night of August 9, 1990, Jennifer went to bed in her own bedroom, in the apartment she shared with her mother. The bedroom was on the ground floor, a detail that, on its own, meant nothing. Ground floor units were common throughout the complex, and a window left cracked against the August heat was not unusual in a building where most residents ran window unit air conditioners rather than central systems. Jennifer put on a pink t-shirt and white underwear printed with blue roses, the clothes she had worn to bed countless other nights that same summer. She fell asleep. That was the last night Jennifer Schuett would ever again be a child who didn't know what it was to be afraid. At some point in the early hours of August 10, 1990, Jennifer's mother checked on her daughter and found the bedroom empty. The window was open further than it should have been. There was no sign of Jennifer anywhere in the apartment. What followed moved immediately from confusion to alarm. Police were called. Officers searched the apartment, the parking lot, and the surrounding streets through the night, with no leads and no sign of where she had gone. Jennifer was found the next day in a field near a dead-end road not far from her home, after children playing in the area discovered her. She had been choked, her throat had been cut deeply enough to damage her voice box, and she had been sexually assaulted. She was airlifted to a Galveston hospital and rushed into surgery. "She was the bravest little girl I'd ever met," said Sharon McBride, the nurse who treated her. At the scene, investigators found no forced entry, no broken glass, no disturbance at a locked door. The only point of access was the bedroom window, left cracked open against the summer heat, the same way windows were left cracked in apartments throughout the complex. That detail, unremarkable on its own, meant the window had offered no resistance to anyone who already knew it would be there, and that it would likely be unlocked. This was not the action of someone testing doors and windows at random in the dark. It required knowing in advance which window belonged to which apartment. Officers recovered Jennifer's clothing from the field, along with a man's t-shirt and underwear left nearby, and preserved the items as biological evidence. In 1990, DNA testing existed, but it required a sample large enough for the technology of the era to process, and what was recovered from that underwear was too small to produce a usable profile. The evidence was real. The science to read it was not yet. Unable to speak, Jennifer began writing down everything she could remember: the brand of cigarettes the man had smoked, the beer cans in his car, and the name he had given her: Dennis. From that point forward, the investigation was not built around a general search for anyone capable of this. It was built around a narrower question: not who in the area could have done this, but who, among the people with any reason to be near that specific apartment building, knew exactly which ground floor window belonged to an 8-year-old girl. Investigators pursued the one lead they had, the first name Dennis. Alongside a composite sketch Jennifer helped a forensic artist build from her hospital bed. Police canvassed the area, circulated the sketch regionally, and followed up on what little physical description she could provide. It was not enough. A first name and a sketch could not be searched against the database. The man who attacked Jennifer had no prior arrest in Texas at the time, nothing that would have placed his fingerprints, his name, or his DNA into any system investigators could check. As far as the records available in 1990 were concerned, he was no one in particular. There was no wrongful arrest in this case and no innocent suspect to clear. The investigation did not fail for lack of effort. It ran out of road because in 1990, there was nowhere left for it to go. What remained was the evidence itself, sitting in storage, unread, waiting for a technology that did not yet exist. The case did not move for the better part of 2 decades, but it was never closed. At the Dickinson Police Department, the file stayed active, and Detective Tim Cromie was one of the officers who kept returning to it. Every day growing up, Jennifer later said, I was on a hunt, looking for a suspect. That same persistence existed on the other side of the case file. The evidence collected in 1990 was never released or discarded. It remained in storage, preserved on the chance that forensic science would eventually catch up to it. The original 1990 investigation is not remembered here as a failure of effort. The detectives working the case that year did everything the technology of the time allowed. What they lacked wasn't diligence. It was a tool that didn't yet exist. In 2008, 18 years after the attack, Detective Cromie and FBI Special Agent Richard Renison teamed up to take another look at the case. Advances in forensic DNA testing meant that samples once considered too small to analyze could now sometimes yield a usable profile. Renison and Cromie agreed it was worth sending the clothing recovered near the crime scene back to the lab. Pursuing that meant coordinating between the Dickinson Police Department, the Galveston County Sheriff's Office, and the FBI laboratory, and committing the time and resources to resubmit evidence that, in 1990, there had been no way to test in the first place. In 2009, 18 years after Jennifer fell asleep in that pink shirt and rose-printed underwear, that same evidence, preserved untouched since the night of the attack, was what finally carried a name back to investigators. The clothing was resubmitted to the FBI laboratory for testing using DNA analysis techniques far more sensitive than what existed in 1990. Where the original sample had been too small to develop any profile at all, the newer method was able to extract a complete genetic profile from that same small amount of material. That profile was then run through CODIS, the FBI's national DNA database, which holds profiles primarily from individuals previously arrested or convicted of qualifying offenses. Unlike a search that requires investigators to already have a suspect in mind, CODIS searches automatically for an exact match against every profile already on file. This search found one. My phone rings and it's the DNA lab, Detective Cromie recalled. We got a hit. The profile matched a man named Dennis Earl Bradford, already in the system because of a 1997 kidnapping conviction in Arkansas. The first name matched exactly what Jennifer had written down in her hospital bed, 19 years earlier. When investigators pulled Bradford's driver's license photograph and compared it to the composite sketch Jennifer had helped create as a child, the resemblance was, in Agent Renison's words, the most surreal moment of my life. The result came 14 months after the evidence was resubmitted for testing, a span of time that those who had waited 18 years could hardly fully comprehend once they heard it. It also confirmed what the crime scene had suggested from day one. Investigators had concluded in 1990 that whoever came through that ground floor window had known, specifically, which window belonged to that apartment. Bradford, it would soon be confirmed, had lived in Dickinson at the time, close enough to have known exactly that. That name was Dennis Earl Bradford, a welder 40 years old at the time of his arrest, living in North Little Rock, Arkansas. He had no known relationship to Jennifer or her mother. He was, by every available record, a stranger to them. But he was not a stranger to Dickinson. Investigators confirmed Bradford had lived in the city at the time of the attack, close to Jennifer's apartment. That single fact resolved what the crime scene had raised from day one. The cracked, ground floor window that had seemed unremarkable, common practice across the complex in the Gulf Coast heat, had not been exploited by chance. It had been exploited by someone with enough local familiarity to know exactly which window led into which apartment. The entry point that told investigators this was not random finally had its answer. Jennifer was told of the DNA match in Bradford's arrest in mid-October 2009, 18 years after the attack. He was charged and was preparing to stand trial, the moment Jennifer had spent her entire adult life imagining, The day she would finally face him and tell him in her own words, "You did this to me," was wrong. And I got you. That day never came. While awaiting trial in the Galveston County Jail, Dennis Earl Bradford died by suicide. There would be no trial. No jury verdict. No formal legal declaration of guilt. Only the confession investigators say he gave them in the interview room, never tested in open court. There were no answers about Bradford's motive beyond what he reportedly told investigators directly. He had been dead for years by the time any further explanation could have been sought, and the full truth of why he chose Jennifer specifically on that night would never be fully known. Galveston County District Attorney Kirk Sistrunk, who oversaw the case as it moved toward prosecution, spoke publicly about Jennifer's role in keeping it alive. "Jennifer has been a tremendous asset to this investigation from the beginning, an inspiration to all of us." The legal outcome is direct. Dennis Earl Bradford was charged with attempted capital murder in Texas. He never stood trial. There was no conviction, and no sentence was ever handed down in connection with the attack on Jennifer Schuett. The only legal consequence he ever faced for any of his known crimes was a 12-year kidnapping sentence from the unrelated 1997 Arkansas case, of which he served 3 years before parole. For Jennifer's case specifically, justice was not delivered through the courts. It ended not with a verdict, but with a confirmed identity, an alleged confession, and a defendant who took his own life before the system could reach a final judgment. If you know a survivor of violence who has chosen to speak publicly, the most useful thing you can do is not look away from their story. Follow their advocacy. Support the organizations they choose to work with. This case was only solved because someone refused to let it stay quiet. If you've watched this far, leave a comment and let us know where you're watching from. And hit subscribe so you don't miss the next videos.